Welcome to Ancestral Health Today, evolutionary insights into modern health.
On today's episode of Ancestral Health Today, we have Pilar Egues. Pilar is an Ecuadorian cultural anthropologist. She's a writer and award-winning filmmaker. Over the past 20 years, she has lived, worked, and carried out research and community-based projects in and about Ecuador, Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, and Japan. She's a co-founder and director of Comidas que Curan, Foods That Heal, an independent food education and media company dedicated to researching and promoting traditional food knowledge through ethnographic research and film. Her award-winning documentaries have been screened in 3 different languages across North America, Latin America, Europe, and Asia. Through her research, public speaking, and films, she amplifies the voices of older men and women who are the bearers of traditional knowledge about food and medicine in Latin America. She has brought this work to communities in Ecuador through filmmaking and research education projects, as well as to U.S. college students in the United States through film screening and lectures. She's a published author and speaks internationally on topics ranging from cultural history, food heritage, health, nutrition, and conflict transformation. Pilar, welcome to the show. And can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Isabel, and everyone that makes this podcast possible for inviting me. Well, I'm from Ecuador. I'm from Quito, the capital, and so from the highlands. I grew up there and partially went to school there, and then I came to the U.S. to finish my bachelor's degree. And then I went back to Ecuador for a while to get my master's and also work for a while. And then I came back here to Illinois to do a PhD in sociocultural anthropology. And after that, I did a postdoc for 2 years at U of I in community health. And that's when I started my food anthropology research, focusing on Ecuador. And I've been doing that for the past about 10 years. I started this project called Comidas que Curan, Foods That Heal, which is now like a production company, film production and research project that I've been working on for several years. I love to study and research about food. So I'm an anthropologist, so I work with communities. I go into different communities, especially in Ecuador. That's been my focus for the past 10 years. And I work with youth and older people, especially older women who are the bearers of the traditional knowledge with respect to medicine and food. And I also teach, so I do educational programs for the youth, the children and youth in the communities. So we've done a couple of participatory collaborative films with the people in communities, as well as other documentaries that still have the participatory component, but last year was particularly good because we aired, I think there were 2 new documentaries, and it was a great year because of that. Yeah,
amazing. That's a lot to unpack. What drew you to study anthropology in the first place?
So I was doing my undergrad in economics. That was my major. It was really boring. I was really good at it. I kind of I really like math, and I was good at, I did really well. But it was really boring because they always talked about models that didn't align with my experience in Latin America and Ecuador, growing up in Ecuador. So the economic models that I was learning about, they didn't align. And it was mostly based on speculations and based on the history also like of the US. And I was pretty disappointed. So I ended up taking elective class. There was an anthropology class with these anthropologists that were focusing on the Zapatista movement in Chiapas, Mexico. And that's when I fell in love with anthropology, because they really look at issues from this holistic perspective, where not only the political aspects matter, but also the cultural aspects, economic aspects, and the political economy aspects with respect to the broader global economy and the broader global context. So it was, and then the spiritual aspects, and we talked about food, and we talked about culture. So that's what made me, engage with anthropology and shift my career.
And then from there, what gave you the impetus to even dive deeper into food anthropology and make that a big part of your focus?
So I took a break. I was doing anthropology, but not. I looked more at the history. So after that, I was working with communities first in Ecuador, and then I looked at issues of women's health and sexuality for a while, and then I was looking at human history. So that was my dissertation focus. So after that, I was ready to do something more in the field. And my motivation to start with food studies or food anthropology was, it was very personal. It was my personal journey with food and with health. So I had been, for the whole time that I was doing my PhD, I really struggled with my health. Looking back, I realized it had a lot to do with stress. It couldn't be fixed with the diet, but I kept looking in the diets like for answers, and I did a bunch of diets, including vegan and what's this other one, comparable to vegan, that you just eat rice and vegetables. So I got really, I became, I lost a lot of weight. I was really skinny that whole time, and I was always cold, and my gut was, that's when I really destroyed my gut. Just eating, I was eating a lot of oatmeal. I ate it every day. I ate oatmeal every day. I didn't soak it or anything. I was just eating oatmeal because I felt that was, it was healthy. And then, the more vegetables and raw vegetables, I didn't understand. And a lot of beans also. And then I kept in touch with a friend from Ecuador, and she we exchanged a lot of this kind of information, and one day she gave me the Sally Fallon's book, Nourishing Traditions. And then I found my mom's recipe for quinoa soup, which is it's a very traditional soup. It's a traditional recipe from Ecuador, especially from the highlands where I am from. So I was surprised to find that in that book, and I read the book, and I was surprised to find all of this, this new perspective on that was for me new, because I had been looking in veganism or vegetarianism for answers. And then all of a sudden, this book had a lot of good arguments for eating the traditional way, the way that my mom raised me with, and my grandmother raised me with. And it was really simple for me to just try it. And as soon as I tried, I started eating meat. And because I was also, I didn't eat beef and pork for a long time. So I started, introducing more meat and eating more the traditional way, chicken and rice and vegetables, tortillas with cheese or whatever. And it's more close to my heart. And then immediately I started feeling better. So going back to your question, that's what made me that made me interested in pursuing food anthropology as a research path, because I realized how much wealth of knowledge was in my own family, and that's what I found on this book, and I was surprised that it was a book written in English, and it was a best-selling book, and I wasn't looking at this for my own health, and I felt that other people also needed to know, because everything made sense at that moment for me. Like everything made sense. Like this knowledge is being tested for so many generations, and it's been passed on, by my grandmother's ancestors, and then I have that knowledge as well. Not only for food and for recipes, but also for medicinal recipes with herbs and other things that are part of the way we are raised in Latin America. Even my generation, I grew up in the city, but I got all of this knowledge from my elders who were raised in the country. That they were closer to the herbs, to the garden, to the animals, and so they have all of this folk knowledge about food and medicine. So that's what made me start this project.
Wonderful. So tell me more about how you grew up and what was the food and culture intersection. How did people relate to food? Who prepare those foods? When was that? When different foods were utilized within your culture, and how that impacted people's relationships and celebrations and so forth and so on. And then what was the difference when you came to the States?
Yeah, there were a lot of questions there, but one of the questions was like, who prepared the food? So for us, it was my mom. Like we were raised, my brother and I were raised by my mom, because my parents got divorced when I was 5. So I was raised by my mom, and she's the one that made the food. And I remember, I remember that she sometimes gave us soup or beans and rice. Not so much meat. I don't remember meat, but yeah, beans and rice for breakfast, or soup for breakfast, which is very different to what my peers in school were having, because I went to private school, and my friends in school, or not my friends, but my classmates, they were like wealthier, and it was an American school, so there's this cultural hegemony. I don't know if that makes sense, or I can unpack it, but basically it's this idea that you have to try to mimic the US and US culture and whatever is related to the United States, and whatever is on like Hollywood, or the magazines from the States. So my classmates were, I know, because I went to, sometimes I stayed overnight, like sleepover at their home after doing like an assignment, and I know what they were having for breakfast, like cornflakes and milk, and orange juice, and like pancakes from the box. And because these were very wealthy, my wealthy families. The kids from wealthy families were my classmates, and so this is the class of people that used to go to Miami like on the weekends, right? So they have like, they're being big landowners. They're in the political. Also, they also have a lot of political control in the country for a long time. They're part of the oligarchy, you would say. So they have money, so they go to Miami, and sometimes they bring stuff from there, because at that time it was not so easy to get this kind of stuff like in the supermarkets. Right now you can get like pancake syrup in the supermarket, in some supermarkets, but back then you have to some of these things, like very cultural U.S. cultural foods, bring them directly from the U.S. So it was pretty sad, but I mean, I was bullied, like in school for eating these foods that my mom made, because we were not of this social class. Like my mom was working class. She was a nurse, and she was a single mom. So she sometimes sent me also these traditional snacks, like in my lunchbox, and I like it was totally unacceptable within my circle, because it would be like toasted corn. We call it tostado, with chochos, which is lupin, which is like it's a kind of bean that grows in the Andean region that is very high in protein, and these are very these are traditional foods, like even ancestral foods in this region. Like, for example, lupin is native to the Andes. So my classmates were bringing like packaged stuff, and that was a cool thing to do. And so that's what I remember in terms of my growing up. I also remember my mom going doing a lot of effort to bring me homemade food to wherever I was. So after school, like high school or school, I went to music school in the afternoon. So I took the bus and dropped me off at the music school, and I spent my afternoon there. And then my mom would bring me the prepared food for me to eat, like on the sideway or on the sidewalk, or like just the entrance of the music school, like, hall, and I would be eating that. And it was kind of shameful at the time for me, like, be eating that way, because she didn't want me to eat the foods from the store, like, the packaged foods. She would really take care of us in that way, like through the food that she would give us. And what I said about the breakfast is something very traditional in the country. It's a very much of a part of the rural culture to have this quote unquote heavy breakfast. What for us, for anyone today, like having soup for breakfast, or like meat and beans and rice for breakfast, is considered heavy. But in the country, it's traditional. So that's one of the ways I think my mom showed us her love. By really, putting so much effort in really thinking in our nutrition, even though we didn't like it, because it was not aligned with, with what everybody else was doing and what our, with classmates were doing. But and then in terms of the rituals and stuff that you were talking about, we always got together with my family, especially my mom's side family, and my grandmother was like the matriarch. She was the mom of 5 sisters, like that were the sisters of my mom, my aunts, and they were many, especially a few or 2 or 3 of them were like my second moms. Also, like they raised me. They knew a lot about like traditional foods and how to cook. Really, like this knowledge of cooking traditional foods as well as medicine. So they taught me a lot of the things I know about the herbs, even though it's not a lot. But when I see other people don't know anything, but I know. That I realize when I come here how much I know about herbs, because my aunts taught me that. Like they would prescribe certain herbs and preparations and remedies in special circumstances, and I learned all of those things growing up with them. So when we got together, it was all of them cooking, and the kitchen was a mess. And my grandmother was usually very stressed out. She was super stressed out because these traditional dishes are very complicated to make. Some of them, they are very in Spanish, my grandmother would say laborioso, which means it takes a lot of labor, like a lot of work. It's very complicated, cumbersome to do. So she would have like an entire crew of people, like all of her daughters, like helping out, and then it would be a delicious meal. I mean, like I can tell you about some of the recipes that are very dear to me that, you know, my grandmother used to make, like the plantain ball soup. That's one of my favorites. Rompope, she used to make. She used to make these, they're kind of like buns, but they're made with this tuber, which is, again, I think only found in the Andes. I think in Ecuador and Colombia, we call it zanahoria blanca, which would translate as white carrot, but it's not the white carrot or the parsnip that you find in the store here. It's a different kind of tuber. It's a mix between yuca and something else, but it's one of my favorite foods. And she used to make it, just even boil that with some salt and olive oil was like and she would tell me all of the health benefits, that is good for fertility, that is good for it's like a very light food that you can eat at night, so it can help you sleep, things like that. I mean, she knew everything about every food. So.
That's amazing. So you go back and forth to your hometown, or?
Yeah, especially recent. I mean, I've never, I've always stayed in touch, especially over the past, like I said, 10 years, because I've been doing the research there. So I go like every year, at least one time. But this past couple of years, I've been going back several times a year because I've been working on films, and research.
Have you seen those traditions changed, or have they stayed the same for the most part?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I would say like it's not a new change, but it's changing more and more. Like, for example, over the past, I don't know, 5 to 10 years that I've been going back, what I've seen is that surprised me a lot is like I go there with a lot of expectation to eat good food, because foods that you cannot find here in the States. And I go and ask, friends or acquaintances, like, oh, can you recommend a place to eat? And a lot of them would say, just go to the mall, and go to the mall, to the food court. So everything, like I said, there's this cultural imperialism that we are trying to mimic, the United States in every way. So the malls look like, a lot of them look like the malls here in the States, and they have a food court with a lot of these chains, a lot of which are U.S. Food chains, but a lot of them are also like local food national chains also. So, for example, if you want ceviche, or you want like arroz con menestra, or something like very, very traditional, very like Ecuadorian, quote unquote, it's very difficult to talk about Ecuadorian food because it's so diverse. There's so much of the regional cuisines. But for example, there's some chains that you can find at the malls where you can find ceviche and other things. And for me, the experience is terrible because one of the things for me, most important for me, is like to be able to eat in with real silverware and in real plates. And at these malls, it's always the paper plates and the plastic silverware. And for me, that completely changes the experience of eating and the taste, everything. and because they're masks, they're chains. It's not the same. I was looking, whenever I go, I always try to look for the hole in the wall type of places. But there's also a lot of new cuisine, like the chefs that are like academic chefs. They've gone to school and they're trying to use the traditional foods as a base and then create new recipes, which, some of them are really good. Others are a ripoff, in my perspective. And they also, I think they also, I am very critical of the way a lot of the chefs, or the chefs, inferiorize the traditional foods, and they claim to be doing something better. I think the traditional foods and the traditional recipes can't be improved. They are always already perfect. You can innovate, you can create something different, and that's fine, but you cannot claim that it's better. And a lot of these chefs, I mean, that's what they taught in schools, in the culinary schools, because they follow the European models, the French cuisine and the Italian cuisine. And I think that's a very Eurocentric way of looking at food and culture. And it's unfortunate because we have such a rich culture, food culture, and we don't need to try to mimic anything or anybody. I mean, that's a very colonial kind of approach to food. So
yeah. And how do you think that those changes are affecting the health of the population? What have you observed?
Well, it's been going. It's been following the trend in the developing world, in the U.S. and Europe. Like, our epidemiological profile of the population is increased prevalence of chronic conditions like diabetes, heart disease, etc. But it's coexisting with infectious type like profile. And malnutrition. Malnutrition is widespread. It's widespread, especially in the rural areas. So it's a combined kind of scenario. Definitely the standardization of the diet is what is behind a lot of these outcomes in terms of health. There used to be a lot more diversity in the diet in terms of the ingredients. And that's where my work with the seed savers come in, because, there's a movement of farmers in Ecuador to try to save the seeds of many of these vegetables and fruits and even animals that used to be eaten, and they're getting forgotten, or they're not grown anymore, and because it's becoming more and more standardized, like just a few vegetables, and that's just standard. In spite of that, if you go to Ecuador to a supermarket, you will find a lot more diversity than you find in the U.S., especially in somewhere like the Midwest, for example, where I have lived for a long time. It's pretty pathetic, like just apples and bananas that come from somewhere else, like nothing's local. Over there, yes, but not just that standardization, but it's all grown in as monocrops, and there's widespread use of pesticides, and it's obviously affecting people's health because of that. And then, I mean, as cities have grown more and more. For example, if I go back to my home city, Quito, I don't recognize 80% of the city. You would drop me there, I don't know where I am, because only a tiny bit of it remains from the time where I grew up. So it's been growing so rapidly. People, I mean, there's a lot of immigration, and the city has grown so much that it's just impossible for me to recognize it. So what I'm trying to get at is that all of these changes bring along lifestyle changes for people, right? So there's like so much contamination or so much traffic in the streets because population is growing and growing, and all of these entails changes in how people eat. So it's really hard for people to go back to their. I mean, it's a city lifestyle. You don't go back to your house to eat your food. It's hard, it's even, people don't have time to make foods at home, and the foods that they find in the street, there's some good options, but a lot of it is fast food. A lot of it is convenience is winning, and that's impacting a lot of what people are experiencing in terms of health, I think.
Yeah, the industrialization and the fast foods and everybody's out to work, and these traditional roles within families that don't really exist anymore really change the landscape, and it affects food culture, it affects health, it affects community. It's a ripple effect into everything.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because just yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine who is from my home city, and she was complaining about something I've also experienced, that when I go back to Ecuador, I noticed that a lot of people don't get together as often as they used before. And getting to, I like to emphasize it. It's not just the food that you eat, but how you eat it that makes a difference in how you're gonna take that in, how the impact is going to have in your body, etc. So these opportunities to eat with your loved ones, to eat in community. I mean, this is how we evolved to eat. We evolved to eat with other people, right? To share our food with other people. That's it's kind of like in our brain, right? At least, and it's very. It used to be I think it's much more still, it's still a tradition or a way of eating that is more prevalent in Latin America and in Ecuador in general compared to the U.S. Like in the U.S., it's more common for people to be okay eating by themselves, but in Ecuador, no. In Ecuador is very much of a communal, a social activity. So, especially after the pandemic. This really changed the way that people interact with each other, and with cities growing. Like I said, for example, I have family members that live in a part of the city that is very kind of far from the, like in a valley compared to the the main city, and they just don't like to go. They don't go because it's the traffic, and it's the distance, and they have a lot of these valleys that the surrounding cities and the suburbs have grown so much that they have all their facilities like the banks and other things in that area, and they don't have to go to the other area for any reason. So that's an excuse not to reunite with their friends. So my friend was complaining that she has a group of friends and they never get together. They live in the same city. And every time we go back, like as an immigrants, right? Like we are always looking to meet with our loved ones, like with our friends. But we find out that they never get together if we don't go back and, create an excuse. So I think that this tendency to like alienate yourself from others is like an ongoing one, but it has been strengthened after the pandemic, and it has hurt. I mean, it definitely hurts your physical health, your mental health, and I still think that there's a lot more research to be done in terms of what the impact of these psychosocial factors in your health through food, So not just what you eat, but in the context in which what you eat. I think some of those studies exist here in the US in terms of obesity, for example, child obesity. They look at how like family meals make a difference compared to like eating in front of the TV or eating by yourself. So I think it's a big deal, creating more opportunities to eat in community, and that not only entails like people getting together, but how spaces are organized. And like I said, that the more we try to mimic the US, the more we are going to resemble these infrastructures and these structures that promote or facilitate you just grabbing something and eating it by yourself wherever you are or wherever you go, instead of creating this infrastructure. I remember, I think there's a Chef's Table episode with this Italian chef that refused to put separate tables in his area. It's amazing. I thought it was revolutionary, because he said this is the point. I mean, it really doesn't matter what you're eating. It matters that you are all. If you're coming to my restaurant, you have to all sit in this one table with 2 benches on the side, so that we can have a communication around the food, because that's what's making a difference.
Yeah, it's important for sure. So tell me more about the work that you're doing about food. Let's start with Comidas que Curan, Foods That Heal.
Yeah, like I said, it was a project that was inspired in my desire to learn more and communicate to the world, and especially to my community, about the value there is in our heritage, in our cultural heritage, and that is alive in the memory of grandmothers and mothers, and even in us, that we need to really document it. We need to promote it. We need to know about it, and we need to raise awareness of the value it has and the urgency of holding on to it, because I think it's one of the treasures we have in our culture and in our country. And I know this because I've been living in the US for more than 15 years now, and I see that kind of generational communication of knowledge, that transmission, is being interrupted for a long time here. Because the industry has taken the place of the moms and the grandmothers. So the industry is the one who tells you what to eat, because of through advertisements or whatever is available in the store. But it's not those heritage recipes, the one or your mom. I mean, but your mom might be cooking something that is significant for the family, and that's great. But it's long disconnected from the local traditions and from the local foods, right? So that's something that we still have in Ecuador. We still have a regional cuisine. That means that it's a cuisine whose value comes from the fact that it's cooked with local ingredients, with the vegetables, with the fruits, and with the animals that are raised in the local area, in that area, and that have been, for generations, for thousands of years. For example, one of my documentaries looks at a fishing community. They have been fishing. Their ancestors, as far as we know, were there like 5,000 years before Christ. They were fishing, and they were diving, and they were collecting their own food. And the people there today continue to do the same. So, this is really powerful. If you look at yourself or the ground where you're standing, how much of the food that you eat comes from the local traditions, the local vegetables, the local fruit. Maybe 1%, maybe for some people, maybe nothing. Maybe everything that they eat comes from somewhere else. they don't even know where it comes from. It may come from as far as China, you know. So there's such a disconnect from the land, you know, from the land where you're standing, which is a really powerful way to build a sense of belonging. And belonging is a very, very powerful factor in mental health and physical health. I mean, it's one of the things that keep us going. You need to have this sense of belonging, this community, and food is one way in which you reinforce that belonging. It's really important for mental health. The fact that your food is meaningful, it means something. It has a tradition, it has a story that is shared and that has been passed along for so many years in this community that you're part of. So this is what drove me to do this work and put it in the film format. So put it in a video format because younger generations, like kids and, you know, teenagers, they're not too interested in listening to their grandmothers. It's not interesting to them. So that was one of the ways that I and my colleague Alejandra came up with in terms of how to entice, how to motivate, especially younger generations, by creating this space, not only to engage with this knowledge in an audiovisual format, like in our digital age, but also to create learning opportunities for them to also participate in the making and be the protagonists. So be the ones that are in the big screen, both as, you know, as youth, and to see their elders as protagonists in these films is very empowering. It's very empowering for everybody in the community. And I just heard from some friends in Esmeraldas, where I did one of my, like, two of my films are based in Esmeraldas, which is an area in the coast with a very strong tradition, Afro-Ecuadorian tradition. Majority of the population is of African descent, and the food is such an important part. But again, they have all of these influences from the city and from abroad, from the US. And they brought the film to two of my films to the communities, and they just told me about, like, how excited the kids were to see themselves in the film and to see their family members in the film, because it's a big deal. It's a big deal, especially if they know it's been screened somewhere else. It's received recognitions like awards. I hope one day we will be on the TV. You know, we will get these films to show on the mainstream media, because it's such a powerful influence for people, right? So that's kind of like the philosophy behind this project.
There's a lot of us in the US that have come from other places, other countries. How do you think we can best balance maintaining those traditions alive and telling those stories to our children, and keeping that knowledge going without having access to the land where those foods come from? One of the things that I struggle with, I love my Dominican food, but that food is traveling a lot of miles. Is one thing, and that struggle between eating that and putting more emphasis on what's local to the area where I am in the Northeast, which is nothing like what I grew up with or like the most. So how do you keep that balance going?
I love that question. Yeah, because I struggle with the same. But I think you can do both things, because I'm not like I don't advocate for like a fanatic kind of like, close-minded approach to eating and food. I think food is really its meaning. It's the meaning you make or you put in the food, or the meaning that the food has for you. Like I said, and it connects a lot with your emotions, with your memory, with your sense of belonging, with your connection to other people who you are eating with. So if we like us, we are immigrants, right? We are sharing with other people that might or might not be our family members or our members of our ethnic community. And we're still building a community. We're still building a bond through the food, whatever food it is. We are still building a bond, a community, and we are still nourishing ourselves by sharing that food with other people, no matter what it is. Again, I'm all for agroecology and, organic foods and everything, but this is not the only way of looking at health. I mean, if we look at health from a holistic perspective, like I said at the beginning, it's much more than that. It's much more than what you put in your plate. So for me, you can do that. You can still do that. The first thing I did here was try to find like what are the farms that are nearby. There's so many farms, and they have local produce. They have milk, they have cheese, they have stuff. And for me, it's always a discovery. I just discovered a skyr.
Love it.
I didn't know about it until I came here, and it's amazing. Like they make it with the maple syrup that they make here. And for me, that's part of life, that's part of health. Is being able to feel pleasure from experimenting new things and new flavors and new sensations. And I mean, traditional is great, but we are human beings. We are made to try new things and experiment, and we get pleasure from that. And pleasure is good for us. It's good for it. It's healing. It's repairing ourselves. But on the other hand, I also think that we have a right to our nostalgic foods. Yeah, so I think it's very powerful. I have a friend who studies this concept of food nostalgia, and it's something that develops early in our years, like as we are developing our brain. Our brain develops in our early years, and this is when these memories of the first foods stick to our brain and stay with us for the rest of our life. So, and again, they are tied to memories and a sense of security that came with that space, and that was our home. And for immigrants, I mean, we navigate these feelings and these emotions in various ways, but it's still part of who we are. And I think we have a right to it, because it never goes away. And it, again, it's a source of pleasure. It's a source of peace of mind, of comfort that we get from reproducing, replicating, trying to replicate, attempting to replicate. Sometimes it's impossible to replicate, but these attempts to replicate our nostalgic foods, our traditional foods from home, are also have a healing benefit for us, like a healing potential, because they are having this effect of generating pleasure and having this whole effect in our body. So I hear you about the carbon footprint with bananas or plantains traveling like I don't know how many kilometers to reach this grocery store, but I think we are not to. First of all, I advocate for a guilt-free food, and guilt-free eating in that sense, not in the sense that we get in the tags from the food industry, like, oh, it doesn't have sugar, that's why you don't have to feel guilty. No, we shouldn't feel guilty at all from eating any food, because if you add the guilt to the food, you're harming yourself. You're eating something toxic. Really? I mean, you're having a talk, like you're really hurting yourself by just adding guilt to food. And that's again like a big question mark for research. I think food psychologists are doing a little bit of research on the impacts of, what is the state, our emotional state when we eat. And a lot of us are eating with guilt, and a lot of us are eating with fear
and stress and frazzled
and stress. So we really, that's something that this is a diet that we need to follow, like, a guilt-free eating experience, in the sense that whatever comes to your plate, in a given opportunity,
to nourish you.
You need to get out of that place of guilt and of fear, and whatever is preventing you from enjoying that moment as it is with the people that you have around. Because a lot of these diets, they put a lot of restrictions, and they keep us away. They take us away. They distance us from these opportunities to share food with other people. And I think that's really, I mean, it's harming. It's very harmful, because we are losing a huge opportunity to build a bond with someone because we are making a food choice.
And yeah,
I think that's pointless. And in terms of like feeling guilty for the footprint, I don't think we are the ones called. I don't think we because we're eating our plantain or whatever, like our traditional food, we are not we are not responsible for a huge amount of that, that damage, whatever it is, for the I think there's bigger forces. There's bigger forces compared to the ones that address the needs of immigrants or that demand that there is in the markets for these nostalgic foods. And us, I mean, it's part of the world we live in. I think we go back and forth more and more often, as transportation becomes more available. I mean, and it's just part of the world we live in. I think we can't turn away from that at this point, because immigration is something that is something like a continuum, right? I mean, and in terms of, like you were saying, like preserving the traditions or feeding into those, I think borrowing a little bit from the local and, appreciating and teaching our, younger generations to appreciate what's local, but at the same time to feel pride and love for your heritage. Because a lot of, like I was saying at the beginning, a lot of us experience shame around our heritage, our cultural heritage when it comes to food. And it shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't be feeling ashamed for what we're eating, because there's nothing to be ashamed. I mean, it's a big value that we bring to our community, to ourselves, and to the world.
Yeah, so beautifully said. And that ancestral way of eating is it's not just what's on your plate, but how you're experiencing the food and how it's nourishing, who you are sharing it with, and going back to those traditions of food bringing us together, and being at the center, no matter what it is. Yeah, absolutely. So if someone is listening to this and, they may be the typical person, lives alone, works many hours, eats on the go, and they want to learn more about this way of experiencing food, where would you advise them to start?
Well, I always tell people to watch my films. I mean, a little bit of this is registered there in some of my films. I've also written about this in a few papers, and they're in English. So they're on my website, comidasquecuran.org. Maybe you can include it in your...
Yes, we'll put it on the show notes. Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I mean, invite me to teach a class. I've taught workshops and classes where I do a lot of these like exercises like this. I have people have different experiences with eating, like eating alone, eating with someone else, and eating with an enemy, eating with a friend. It's part of my interest in conflict transformation. I use some of these exercises with eating in different contexts to understand some of the ways in which we can communicate across conflict. So yeah, I love to teach these classes. There's not an online class right now, but I'm always accepting proposals to teach and bring, you know, these ideas to communities, whether it's virtually or in person. And I think that's what I can say for now.
Wonderful. So comidasquecuran.com.org, and we'll link that in the show notes. Any other places that people can find you, social media that you'd like to share?
Yeah, Instagram is Comidas que Curan, and I'm on Twitter as Pilar Egues, even though I'm not very active on Twitter, but more Instagram and Facebook. My Instagram, and also in Instagram, I have a raspando_coco, which is my first film. I try to post in English and in Spanish, but you can still use the translator to find out what I'm talking about. I've conveyed a lot about this in the papers I've written, and in, you know, some of my talks are also listed on the website. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
And also our Ancestral Health Symposium YouTube channel. Some of your talks are also in there.
Yeah,
so
I have
one. Go and see those. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today, Pilar. This has been an amazing conversation. And I'm sure that people will enjoy it and give some more thought about the place that food has in their lives and how it can be a transformative experience.
Awesome. Thank you, Isabel.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Ancestral Health Today. We hope you enjoyed our discussion on how evolutionary insights can inform modern health practices. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast to catch future episodes.